my suggestion on strategy going forward, if you want to do as much elk hunting as possible, I think you have to get in the mindset of being flexible on even like your logistics. I can backpack hunt, or I can road-based hunt, or I got pack goats, or I got llamas, or I got horses, or whatever. Like, having some flexibility opens more opportunity for hunting.
I was like, well, if I throw a mic on, then I can help others the way that these people have all helped me.
Born in the heart of the Pennsylvania deer camp, with the help of experts, friends, and local legends, we bring you valuable knowledge and powerful stories for your hunting adventures. Welcome to the East Meets West Hunt Podcast with your host, Beau Martonik.
All right, I think we are rolling here. Cliff Gray, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to get to finally talk to you. You know, I mentioned before we started recording here, I've had you down on a list of someone I wanted to reach out to for a while to do a podcast, but you've also been one of the most requested guests that I've had in the Western space to bring on the show. So.
Dude,
yeah.
that might tell you something about your audience, dude. I don't know if that's good or bad or what.
I know. I'm starting to question them a little bit. No, man, I've been a big fan of yours for a while now, and really appreciate the stuff that you put out there and helping people, especially like myself and others that are, you know, coming from the East and trying to plan adventures and do things and have experiences all over. And
sure,
you've done a really good job at a no BS approach to it based off of years of experience. And I think that's really cool. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, of course, man. Yeah, no, I enjoy doing it. And I'll be honest with you, Beau, like I actually kind of, I like the East Coast crowd in the sense that it's a little bit of a self-selecting crowd in the sense that they're going out of their comfort zone. And I'm not saying like if you live in Colorado or you live in Wyoming that I'm like, I don't like you as an elk hunter, but it's different when it's like right there. You know what I mean? Versus a guy that's literally making plans to drive across the country, you know, hasn't been into that topography or whatever. I like that crowd, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like, you know, a lot of the reason I started this podcast over, well, I guess it's pushing 7 years now. It'll be this year. Started doing it was when, you know, I got into going out west and learning and trying to, and I wanted to ask people like yourself that knew, you know, a hell of a lot more than I did, questions that, you know, from an East Coast perspective. I mean, now there's a lot more information out there than there was even then, but that was kind of like the goal of like learning and pushing yourself. And my experience of going out west has made it to where I've realized so much more is possible. Because up until I went elk hunting first time in 2016, I'd never been west of the Mississippi. Like I was a pretty, you know, small town kid that was pretty, you know, embedded in Pennsylvania and the surrounding areas. So it was a big deal. And then that's opened my eyes to just a whole world of opportunities.
Oh yeah, dude. It's funny, man. Like literally before I got on here, that's why I messed you up on timing a little bit. I was talking to a guy named Luke McFadden. Do you know who that is?
I know Luke.
Yeah.
Pretty well.
And we were talking about this concept, dude. Like it's amazing how many different adventures there are right now on Earth for an outdoorsman. I mean, this is outside of the context of just like elk hunting and, you know, East Coast guys or West Coast guys or whatever. But when you start to broaden your mind around all the different adventures like an outdoors guy can do, I don't care what anybody says, dude. It's like probably the best time ever on Earth to be alive as an outdoorsman. Like everybody has this perspective of like, oh, I wish I lived during like the mountain man days, right? I think we all have that nostalgia or whatever you want to call it. It's probably not the right term, but we all have that. Like that'd be the era to live in. It's like, I don't know, man. I think now, like you can jump on an airplane. Like right now I'm in the Caribbean. Like I can jump on an airplane. I could spearfish. I can then jump on an airplane and go shoot whitetail. I can jump on an airplane, go elk hunting. Like obviously it takes time and money, But when in the history of humankind can an outdoors guy have that kind of variation? It's crazy, you know?
Yeah. And then be able to even know about those opportunities too.
Yeah.
Like just, the transportation's one thing, but then just even being able to know about those opportunities and be able to go experience them. And it's just, I think it's opened my mind so much to what is possible of things that I thought were out of reach. I've realized that there's nothing that's really out of reach if you can formulate a plan to figure out how to get there,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's 100%. And, but before we kind of get rolling here, Cliff, for those and, my audience that aren't familiar with who you are, a little bit of a background, you mind giving a little bit of who Cliff is?
Yeah, man. So the gist of it is time flies, but I started outfitting. So I came from an outfitting family in Colorado, cattle ranching, outfitting family, was exposed to it there. I went and did some other things in my life in my early 20s. And then I kind of fell back into the outfitting business. I think I was 24, 25, maybe 26. I don't know. But somewhere around then, I bought an outfitting business really, to be honest, on a whim. I knew of the area because it was kind of adjacent to where my father had outfitted back in the 80s and 90s. I knew of the folks that used to run it. It had gone through a bunch of turmoil. I had a different business, was up there having fun with my girlfriend, who's now my wife at the time. We were skiing, having a good time. Ran into this guy that happened to want to sell the business and the permits. So I bought it. Like, really, people ask me, people want the life advice, particularly in the context of like being a guide or an outfitter. And it's like, look, I don't really have that valid of advice because I bought it just because I ran into the guy. And I kind of, in a way, and this could be like my brain is screwed up, or maybe I'm egotistical or what, I don't know. However you want to view it. But I thought, you know what, I can't lose by buying this thing right now. So I bought it from him. A lot of other people could probably look at that decision and be like, Cliff is borderline insane. But that was like my process getting back into outfitting. And the reality is, like, within that, this story, I never thought about it as going back to like a full-time gig. I'd been around, packing and horses and mules and outfitting. And anybody who's been around it for very long knows it's crazy hard work. You know what I mean? Physically, your business risks, all of that. Like, it's fundamentally a shit-tastic business. Like, it's not a good business. You know what I mean? But so I never really thought I'd get back into it, but it's always been a big part of my life too. Being in the outdoors, elk hunting, the mountains, the livestock component of it, packing horses and mules was also a big part of my life too. That I think people who don't have the context don't really understand that about wilderness outfitting. That's a gigantic component of it. But anyways, I got drugged back into it, and I thought really I'll just keep it as a hobby, maybe develop the business a little bit. And then, I don't know, man, like quickly within a couple of years, it was my primary gig. And then I got into the mode of growing that business. So I owned it for 10 years. I ran it for an extra year after I sold it. And I've been, and it was primarily, like I said, wilderness stuff. I'd say 90% public land, all on tags that to this day, almost anybody can draw. Elk was the primary part of my business. Had a fairly, substantial mule deer business, and we did a fair amount of black bear business. And then during that period of time, I did a bunch of stuff in British Columbia pre-COVID. I'd take a bunch of guys up there and do spring bear hunts. So that was a component of my business too. And then, I sold it again fairly quickly. And that time, the thing about when I sold it is I had a game plan. My game plan was it's going to take me 3 or 4 years to sell it. And then I magically sold it in like 2 weeks. So again, which I think was, again, just like fate and circumstances or whatever, I kind of did a little pivot in my life. And then since then, YouTube, and I still do some guiding, and I do some seminar/hunts. That's kind of my new business that I've been working on the last couple of years. So there's a long-winded bio for you, man.
No, that's really good. And I wanted to comment on what you had said about you buying that on a whim. And I think when you're saying, oh, there's not a whole lot of advice to be given there. What I would think of is like, I think a lot of people that can overanalyze things, and sometimes it's a good thing too, but overanalyze things and not be able to make a decision on doing something, because you can always find negatives or how it can't work in a way.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of value in that. I was just joking with someone the other day about, even when I had started doing the podcast, and then when I decided I was going to go full time, I'm not very good with numbers. And if I would have like really looked at what I needed to make a living, I wouldn't have done it when I did, but I figured it out and it worked out. So I'm all glad about it. But I think there's a concept of it, of just like willing to try it and put, to go all in with it. And I think, and I think that's that way, even with hunts or whatever else. I think there's a lot of value in what, how you went about and did that.
Yeah. I mean, to put it another way, at least the way I think about it sometimes, man, it's like, you got to be naive enough to make the decision. You know what I mean? Like, you got to be like a little bit naive to be like, oh yeah, like, yeah, going, 10 days backpack elk hunting, that sounds fun. But you know what I mean? So then you fall into it. The first time you do it, you're like, holy shit, this is wild. This is like, kind of masochistic. And then all of a sudden it becomes a thing. You figure it out.
Yeah.
Becoming an outfitter or a guide, like, I had a little context to that. I've been around it. So that even makes me, a little even more insane, I guess. But for a lot of guys that end up in it, it's just more like they were just naive enough to be able to rationalize the choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, and some of them find happiness in it. Some of them don't. So it's also like everybody's different too. You know what I mean? So
yeah. And I can imagine, and this is not having any experience in it, but that whole business is a lot of like, when it's time to go, it's just like nonstop. I'd feel like during hunting season, like you were talking about the hard work component of it's like, that's your money making time where you're just going. Like, that's gotta be that's gotta be difficult.
Yeah. So, I mean, the business and we can dive into this as much as you want. Cause it's very surprising to me how many questions I get from people who are interested in the guiding and outfitting business. Yeah. I think some of it's curiosity or whatever, but, so one of the challenges I think from somebody who's outside of the business is they don't observe the dynamic you're talking about. Like, I'm trying to think of analogous businesses out there. Like, I've never been a commercial fisherman, but I'm guessing that commercial fishing is very analogous, in the sense that, like, when the season hits, like, you got to make it, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think around the hunting world, there's a little bit of a bias, because a lot of what people observe guides doing is very much like a social media, like Instagram view of it. Because the guides and outfitters who are making a real living, and that's a super small subset. You know what I mean, dude? Like, there's a lot of hobby guides, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. People construe this as like, oh, Cliff's talking shit about guys that only guide a couple hunts a year. No, I think that's awesome. And if you want to do that, that's great too. Like, I had a lot of guys work for me that's what they just like to be, that's kind of how they got their hunting in. That's kind of how they felt like they became more proficient as a hunter. They like to guide. That's awesome. So I don't view it as a negative thing, or I wouldn't, tell somebody that's a poor choice. But a lot of what you see of guides and outfitters, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the hobby guys that are making $1,000 that week. They're whatever, right?
Yeah.
You don't see the guys that are making a real living at it, or you don't see as much of them, because it's exactly what you're talking about, dude. Like, you have to do a lot of volume to make a living. I don't care what anybody says. Like, you have to deal with hundreds of hunters to make a real living in the business. And when you do that and it's seasonal, like, it's like, dude, I mean, when I started putting in camps 1st of August or 15th of August until December, it's just like balls to the wall, dude. And every day is like, the thing that's crazy about it is the amount of so you have all your controllable variables. Like, guys are showing up this time. We got to get them into this camp. all of that stuff is a logistics component of the business. That's just like pretty similar to any business, but you have a huge set of uncontrollable variables, right? Like, are there going to be elk in the area? Are they, what's the seasonal conditions? The snow. Okay, now we're praying for snow. Now we got to dump a snow, but now we keep getting snow. So now it's becoming dangerous because I got guys 6 hours in the wilderness. Like, when am I deciding whether or not I need to go get them? Okay, it's September 10th and the elk hunting's great, but there's a wildfire in this drainage. Like, when am I, like this kind of, that's what the business is, dude.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, you really got 60 days that you got to make a living. You know what I mean? So it's intense. And I always tell guys, like, if you want to buy one like the week after hunting season closes, because you're not going to find an outfitter that's like, oh, I love my business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like December 1st, they're
Get a better deal then.
Yeah. They're all like, I went out of this like this, but it's almost like an adrenaline junkie. The guys who run them well, they're all the same. Like, they hate them at the end, but they also kind of hate they also kind of like the peak of it and just being like, just it. And I get business guys will come and say like, oh, well, the problem is that, you guys have to scale them up and get middle management. It's like, no, you could tell me all your MBA shit. I have an MBA, all of that. I've heard your stuff. In the hunting business, doesn't work. It just doesn't work. This is like the last remaining Wild West shit on earth. You know what I mean? Like, your stuff that you're claiming, it just doesn't work. So you got to be in it like every day. And you're either going to really like that or it's just not going to work. You know what I mean?
Thriving in the chaos.
Yeah,
like that.
Exactly.
Because I haven't witnessed nearly as much, but just like from seeing, even like with using transporters in Alaska, of like, okay, pilots going in, depending on the weather, they got to pick up these people, and they got to fit. And I'm like, when I'm watching it, it's like, man, that's a stressful job.
Sure.
And then like at all levels, I would imagine that is like, again, from the outside looking in, I mean, I feel like anyone who loves to hunt is like a kid growing up. It's like, man, I'd love to be a guy. I'd love to be an outfitter. Like, love to own and do that. But then you get into the nitty gritty of it, and that's I can totally see where you're coming from with it.
Sure.
But I mean, so with you doing that for so long, and I mean, it just gives you so much experience. Like, you grew up in Colorado, elk hunting and deer hunting and bear hunting from the sounds of it. But what other things have you, like, I guess, what else have you pulled from that guiding that's helped you today when it comes to whether it's teaching people or whether it's just hunting for yourself?
Yeah. So I think I kind of would put it into two different categories, I guess, there, I think from helping other people, and this has taken me a while to develop, and in some ways I think I may have fallen into it and not realized it, but my experience guiding and being in the field in the hunting component, like, for sure there's things that you learn, right? And we can get into the nitty gritty tactics and tips and all of that, but observing all the guides that worked for me and then all the clientele, that's probably where I picked up things, just from, having a fairly unique position to observe that, right? Like, if you deal with hundreds of guys that are coming out west or, whatever, they can be coming from anywhere, but, they're maybe newer to elk hunting or they only elk hunt a week a year or whatever. So it's like an event. If you observe them, you almost like over a bunch of seasons, you can detect things. Like, dude, I could pack guys into a camp and I could tell you with pretty good probability, like, I think one of these guys is going to one out early. I could tell you that the day I packed them in, right? And then I could also tell you, this is going to sound like a little woo-woo, but I could also take guys into a camp. And of course, I did know like what was going on in terms of game and stuff. And I could predict pretty well, like, okay, these guys are good. Like, dude, in my mind, I would think to myself, okay, I just put these guys in this camp. I got to factor in that we're going to be back in here to pack out elk, because I know like how they're prepared, their minds, like all of these things. I've interacted them with before the hunt. Like they're probably going to kill elk. And then other times I'll pack guys in and be like, these guys are not going to kill anything. You know what I mean? And it's, you pick up on different ways that they've prepped, a mindset, all of those things that you're able to just figure that out.
Yeah.
And I think that some of those, without me knowing, when I talk to a lot of hunters, I think those have been some of the most helpful things to people. You know what I mean? And I get that feedback loop, right? Like, and some of them are like the corniest thing. Like I'll tell guys, okay, if you're going to hunt like high altitude, I don't care like what your work schedule is, whatever it is, you're coming from Ohio. I know you can't take an extra day off of work, but if you want my first piece of advice, don't drive through the night and then get to a trailhead the next morning and hike in there. You do that, like your chances of altitude sickness, your chances of quitting within 3 days is like 10x. You know what I mean? And it sounds like a very like basic thing or something that a lot of people are going to be like, oh, no, whatever. No, we have to drive. Like I'm going with 4 guys. We're going to drive through the night. We're going to drive 30 hours straight, right? Cliff doesn't know what he's talking about. No, dude, I know what I'm talking about. I don't give a shit how big your balls are. If you do that, your chances of coming out early are like 10x. You know, just like just little things like that. You know what I mean?
Man, and that's honestly, I think that's so much more helpful even than specific tips or tactics when it comes to say killing an elk, because man, you're describing me and my buddies like of our times going out there when we went to Idaho and we drove 37 hours straight going through, arrived at 2 a.m. and in the morning got up to hike in, and it's like, what were we, you know? And it was terrible. And luckily that wasn't as high of altitude, but I've dealt with the altitude sickness side of things because I ran myself down and I was sick before I went in, and didn't help the inners. And now it's like, man, if you can, I'd rather have a half a day less of a hunt or a day less of a hunt to give myself some more time and do that. And I think that's, you literally just gave me some flashbacks there.
Well, no, everybody's been through it, dude. I've done it too. Like I get it, but like it's one of the, it's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's like a perspective that I developed just because of like iteration with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And dude, the thing is, it's like I'll tell you what I hated about the outfitting business, and I think it wraps into this conversation, man. Like, contrary to what people, I think some people observe from the guiding and outfitting business, is that guides and outfitters, they do not want to deal with negativity or a lack of success. Like, dude, they really, I mean, I can't speak for all of them, but 95% of them plus, they want you to be successful. They want you to enjoy yourself. They're not trying to steal your money. All of that. And so whenever the trip goes bad, if it's their fault or your fault, it sucks, man. You know what I mean? And so these are things that I really tried to like, analyze over the years. Cause I'm like, dude, I don't, I mean, like a guy quitting early, even on a guided hunt, which from a practical standpoint, if I'm guiding them, I just got back 4 days of my life. If my guide's guiding them, the guide just got back 4 days of his life, and maybe he can help me on other things. All right. So there's this like one view is like, oh, okay, well, it's on the hunter. They quit. But overall, that's always a very negative experience for the outfitter and the guide. Like they don't want you to quit. You know what I mean? Like it's never viewed as a positive thing because it's like we didn't fulfill the mission. So over the years, I tried to help guys avoid that stuff because it made running the business more fun,
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah, I would totally agree. And one thing that I've changed kind of a perspective on or thought about it more, I guess, in the last few years is when for people, especially, it's hard to get time. Say you're coming from the east to go out west, and if you want to go out elk, especially say archery elk hunting in Colorado or whatever, it's super hard, and it takes. I mean, it took me 4 years before I killed my first bull, and with some of those trips being 2 weeks of spending that time there, it takes a lot of time, and I think I've always kind of been like under the, I don't know if it's ego or whatever else you may want to put it, that like, oh, I just want to do it myself and grind it out. But I think there's so much value. I don't think there just is so much value in being able to, if you can afford it or plan it, to go with an outfitter and learn. But like, and I want to hear this is where I want to hear your perspective, but be an active participant in learning and asking questions and going through it. I think you can shorten that curve so much because you can listen to podcasts, you can watch videos and stuff, and it's great for information, but there's nothing like experiencing it in the moment. I remember, watching all these videos, learning how to elk call, I thought, and then I get out there and you get your first encounter. It's like, wait, am I supposed to do this now or that? And you don't remember. But I think I think spending time around people that have all that experience can really help you. And then especially like, again, if you're busy, got young kids, maybe you can only do one trip every 4 years or whatever it is. It's like probably better spent to save up your money and make that experience, a little bit better. But I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, man. So, you're going to get totally convoluted answer from me because I guess I can't answer anything simply.
No, that's great.
I'll preface this that in a lot of different things that I do, that I'm passionate about, I spend a lot of money on guided trips. So fishing, spearfishing, I hire guides a lot. And in that context, I found exactly what you're talking about, right? If I find the right guy, and I'll get into that more, if I find the right guy that understands my goals, and my goals, like we'll stick to that analogy, like my goal might like a wahoo, right? In the spearfishing world, that's like a big bull elk, right? Like that's on a lot of guys' like bucket list, right? So I can hire one guy and my goal is just to shoot the wahoo, right? And he's going to take me out and he's just going to, do this, do that. And it's all like very mission driven. And I shoot the wahoo and we take a picture with it. And that's great, right? If that's my goal. Now, if my goal is to understand how to potentially do it on my own, or just intrinsically, I want to understand every aspect of it, I can't go with just any spearfishing guide. I got to go with a guy that understands that goal. You know what I mean? And that's perfectly analogous to elk hunting or mule deer hunting or whatever. And I say this within my own business, like that I ran, like there's certain guides I had that wouldn't have been compatible with you wanting to learn, right? And then there's other guides that are very compatible with that, right? And so I think that your point is for sure in general, absolutely the case. But if you want to maximize the value you get out of a guided hunt in the spectrum of your goal, you need to make that really apparent when you book. Okay. And you need to find guides that are real conducive to that, right? Like they like to do that, because here's the deal. The reality is the other side of that, I would say that if your goal is actually just to shoot an elk, like you just want to bucket list shoot an elk, then you don't really want the guide in general that's like a teacher. You want the guy that's like a stone cold, like mission oriented guy. Like we're going to grind it out. And, instead of riding 2 hours to a glassing point, and then we can have energy to talk about strategy and everything else. We're getting up at 2 a.m. and riding to this spot because it's the only place I can find elk right now type of guide. You know what I mean? Like if you just need to kill something, like it's a generalization, but a lot of times you don't have both in an individual, right? Like that you've hired. So that's an element of it. I think the other component is you could broaden that to the type of hunt you're doing too. You know what I mean? And then certain aspects of elk hunting too. I think that, let me step back because I think I'm getting like a little granular. for sure, just going has value. Even if it's literally it's the first time you go up to the mountains, you go up with a guide, and the first day he hikes you up, and you're looking at a basin, and elk, walk out of the timber, and you blast one with your rifle the first day. There's still some value in that, right? Because you know like what you're getting into, and the logistics involved in all that. So there's still some value in that. But I should have said that first. But to dive deeper into the this concept, there are things, man, that I think you have to kind of look from the perspective of, like you brought up calling, right? Like elk calling. And I don't know the specific hunts you've been doing, Beau, but I'm guessing that you understand the dynamic, that it's not like, the TV shows and the YouTube shows where every morning you go out and bulls are bugling and there's vocalizations all over, right? So, there are guys that have been hunting the Colorado wilderness for 15 years, and honestly, they know very little about elk vocalizations. Like, because they just don't get into elk that often. You know what I mean? It's almost like, they could, and a lot of them have killed a lot of elk, but because they're not constantly into elk vocalizations, it's hard to learn a lot about that. So they don't get the iteration on setups and that sort of thing. There are for sure places, and unfortunately, the price of these hunts are going up, but there's still places where you can get like 10 years of public land vocalization experience in like 4 days. You know what I mean? Just because, it's a nice ranch and whatever, it's cushy accommodations and all of that. And that's great depending on what your goals are in elk hunting. But there's also an advantage of like, you're going out with a guide, and that guide has been, he's been guiding in an area where he's dealing with these elk vocalizing every single day, and you're going to be able to learn from him, but you're also going to be there for 4 or 5 days, and you're going to be into elk vocalizing every single day. It's hard to replicate that in public land,
Yeah. No, out of like the public land hunts I've been on, there's been one hunt I can think of where it was like I was hearing a lot of vocalizations, and it was incredible. I learned more in that 3-week span than I did in all the other years of elk hunting. And then this past year, so I had 2 elk hunts, and one was more of an open country kind of, it was do-it-yourself public land hunt. And then I got an opportunity to go to a ranch and get to hunt like premium elk. And oh my gosh, was that incredible.
Night and day difference.
No, night and day, but it was so I learned so much about being around elk, and like what you just, like that was a perfect example, the vocalizations, so that when you do hear that once or twice in a 4-day span on public, like you can make a little bit more of it. I don't know. I felt like it was there was so much value in that outside of just like, yeah, it was an incredible experience, but I felt like I still learned a lot from it, even though it wasn't exactly realistic of what a normal hunt would be for me.
Sure, but I think you're right, dude, that like those segments of it, like, okay, so now you've seen that, so then when you're on public land and you've been grinding, but on the 3rd day you get into some elk that are vocalizing, you are way more effective at taking advantage of that moment, because you've already iterated through like doing setups on that, whatever ranch you're hunting or whatever, like you got that iteration. So it does make you better in that moment in areas that you don't have as much opportunity. And it's a funny dynamic. And I look at like a lot of guys that are, some of them unknown, some of them very well known, like public land hunters, like guys that grind on public land, and particularly within the backpack hunting context, they're actually not very good elk hunters, like from a behavioral standpoint, but they are phenomenal mountain guys, phenomenal mountain men. That's really the skill set that they've honed in the last 20 years, is like just being a stud in the mountains. They wake up and they're not tired. They know how to take care of themselves in the mountains. They got all their shit together. Like it's easy, and they're like comfortable in the mountains. a lot of those guys, that's really what they are, because they haven't had the exposure that you're talking about, just as much interaction with the elk. You know what I mean? And then you get the inverse. You get guys that, you know, have been hunting ranches the whole time, that, you know, they've been into that the whole time. And it's not necessarily just like private land. Certain states, they're managed different. And it's like, like I've had guides, dude, that worked in Arizona and they worked in XYZ unit or whatever, and they know a lot about elk, but they don't know a whole lot about like living in the mountains. You know what I mean? Like they're pretty incompetent in that regard, you know? So it's kind of two different skill sets. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, and that makes a lot of sense. And even with, say, those guys that when you're talking about being like the mountain men's side of things, is just the ability to not quit and just be able to withstand all those elements of being able to put in the time and go until the bell rings, per se. You increase your opportunity just in that alone. You know, it's like I've learned for myself. Still, even though that's been quite a few years now of elk hunting, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much, that I screw up more opportunities than I capitalize on. So I need to be able to increase those amount of opportunities to be able to capitalize, and being able to increase opportunities requires being able to withstand those things and stay out there. And all of that stuff that you were just saying there, and being efficient, waking up where you wake up and you're tired and sore, and you may sleep in when you know you should have been glassing for those first, being at your spot for the first 30 minutes of daylight, and those types of things. And I think that's a really good point of that. And but I will say, like, it was really cool to be able to, and I know not everyone can have that opportunity, but to be able to experience what it is like on a place where like elk are vocalizing like crazy, and being able to see it, like, man, it was awesome.
Well, and the other thing is you realize, like, not all elk hunting is, regardless of what people say, not all elk hunting is the same. You know what I mean? I like, if it's very different depending on where you're at, and the density elk makes a gigantic difference in their behavior and everything else,
And it was funny though, like on that hunt, and I'll say that was a 5-day hunt, and it took me till almost the last day to kill one there still. And then on the public land hunt, it was the last day that I ended up shooting a bull on that one, and it was like they were both still hard, but in completely different. In respect, when you're looking for a super old bull, like, even though there's lots of elk around, trying to find that, one is it was I wouldn't say it was like this cakewalk per se that I kind of expected it to be by any means. You still have to work hard, but it's different. It's definitely different. And I think that with expectations of going into it is looking at timelines, especially if you're, when you are hunting public, you're hunting by yourself or whatever it is, like your timelines should be extended of what you're expecting, or being realistic with it. Like, I don't know. I haven't spent much time hunting mule deer, but it's something I want to do. And I understand that, okay, I've been focusing a lot on elk hunting and I've whitetail hunted a bunch, but mule deer is going to be new. Like, I don't expect to get good at it right off the bat. It's going to take a lot of time and experience to try to learn it.
Yeah. Sure. Well, and you got to embrace that for what it is. And
that's fun, man. I love
fun.
it.
Yeah. It's, I mean, it gets to one of my thoughts, man, it's like a lot of, and I would put myself in this category. A lot of guys have a really hard time just kind of disconnecting, right? Like just alone disconnecting, like hunting for 6 days straight. The majority of men right now can't do it. They cannot go into the mountains for 6 days and not check their email. That's the vast majority. Just like, it sounds crazy, dude. And I just, sometimes it's my biggest struggle when I'm like out guiding. I'm like, oh, dude, need to get back there because I got all this shit stacking up. You know what I mean? That component of it is like one of the hardest parts for a lot of guys, so.
Yeah, and now there are places now, a lot more places that get cell reception
Sure.
than they used to. But I remember even a couple of years ago, when I flew into Alaska, it was like there's no cell service, get dropped off. And for the first like day and a half, I had anxiety that
Oh,
I didn't
yeah.
know why, of like, well, because I was also trying to get everything ready to be gone for 2 weeks without responding to anything, make sure I just had everything in order. And knew I forgot some things, and I was just like, but then once I settled in, it was like, okay, I'm good. Then I was like,
Yeah.
on, but it takes me personally like some time to readjust my brain to go from the constant communication and what's on your phone and
Yeah.
work and business and all that kind of stuff. It's tough.
Yeah. But then after like whatever, how many days it is for you, like 2-3 days of it or whatever, you there is a moment, at least I run into it, of like, oh, this is kind of like real life. You know what I mean? It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, like not having all those, those modern things sucking your mind share away. You know what I mean? And dude, not to get like too philosophical about it, but what's crazy is I think that in the next 2 or 3 years, man, between like Elon's Starlink and all this other technology, we're the last era of outdoorsmen that will have experienced pockets of no connectivity. Like in 3 years from now, dude, we're going to be able to pick up our phone, or maybe it's 5 years, I don't know, but we're going to be able to pick up our phone, and it doesn't matter where we're at on this planet, we're going to have Instagram and email and all of that. And so that'll literally be gone forever. You know what I mean? Like the next generation of outdoorsmen will have never experienced being disconnected. It's kind of a wild idea,
Honestly, I haven't thought about that, but because you'd have to be much more disciplined to not use it, but I don't think the majority of people would.
No.
Like that's I don't know. I really haven't thought about that, but I was actually just last weekend I was ice fishing with a buddy of mine. He'd bought a camp here in Pennsylvania, a remote kind of camp, and we went there. And I was like, I got there and I pulled my phone out and I was like, when you bought this like 4 months ago, there wasn't cell service here. And he's like, yeah, they just they put in a new tower or whatever happened, and it was just like all of a sudden there was 3 bars and 5G that you could use, and he was kind of disappointed about it. He's like, this is my place to get away. But it is I would agree, like seeing like what Starlink can do. It's it's amazing, because I have a mobile Starlink system that I've used if I want to go and I know I need to do work, but I can hunt just with the flexibility that I have to be able to do that. It's nice to be able to connect, but it's crazy because you can pull cell signal anywhere, or internet.
Yeah. And I think the satellite stuff is what's gonna, like you mentioned, the little the mini from Starlink, like it changes the dynamic, man. And like obviously, I think from a rational perspective, it's awesome, right? Like maybe people will be able to enjoy the outdoors more because now they don't have to be away. But I think it's more the crazy thing for me to get my mind around is that the permanency of it. Like once it goes there where we have worldwide connectivity, it'll never be the same. Like we can't, like there's, in a weird way, dude, I can sit, like I was sitting one time in Utah, and I know this spot where a bunch of natives would sit and they knock shards off arrowheads. Like you can literally see the half moons of where these guys would sit. And if you were out there in this area, it would be exactly where you'd glass from, right? Like you'd look around, you'd be like, I'm going to that point to glass, right? And you go up there and there's like 6 spots with all these arrowhead shards where they'd sit there and they'd probably watch it for game and just like cutting their arrowheads, pretty neat. And I can sit in that spot, and in a way, now I can be there and be like, oh, I'm living like the exact same perspective as these guys, right? They're away from their village, they're out hunting. It's just them and their buddies, or maybe they're there solo. I have no idea, or with like just one guy or whatever. And there's like that piece, and I can relate that piece to my like modern life. But once we have worldwide connectivity, that's gone for all of humankind. until an asteroid hits or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, dude. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean it is kind of scary too, because even with having all the modern technologies and social media and everything right at the palm of your hands at all times, us as outdoorsmen have still had those places to disconnect and reset and be away from it. It was actually funny. I was talking to my parents last night, and they were talking about they'd never had social media or used it or anything, and recently they've got on to kind of follow along with some of my stuff and my brothers, and my mom was saying, she's like, man, it's crazy how you can go down these rabbit holes on there and just like waste all this time, and you're all of a sudden and there's so much to learn and it's like, yeah, and your brain, even though I think a lot of it is good, like there's a lot of good things that can come from it, but your brain is so just constantly stimulated to be able to disconnect and go do that. Like I try to at night, now I try to read a book before I go to bed. I try to read at least 10, 15 minutes of a book to get away from the screen. And sometimes it takes me a few minutes to just even get my eyes right to just focus on reading a book based off of everything else that's been going on. So that with constant connectivity, like that's going to make all of that so much harder.
Yeah. It'll be interesting what that looks like. And I know there's a negative, dude, because one thing I specifically remember when I was doing long stretches, like personally guiding, I remember vividly, dude, like where I'd come out of these camps, these wall tent camps, I wouldn't have any coverage. And then there's these big stretches of switchbacks, right? Like I'd get up on a big south face, and I still had like an hour to get down to our lodge. But once I came out on that face, I'd hit these switchbacks and I could see the lodge. And dude, I swear to you, man, the minute I crested that ridge and popped into those switchbacks where I could see the lodge, I would just have this like the most negative feeling in my stomach. Like, oh, like I'm back to this world of shit coming from every direction, right? Like when I get there, I'm going to open my email and I'm going to have this and that and this, and I'm going to have these phone calls stacked up, like all that. And some of that is obviously just like, you got to make a living, right?
Yeah.
But there's another component of it that's like, dude, my brain is literally disgusted with this world. You know what I mean? Because it's making me nauseous, So I know there's a component of that we do. There's some element of being disconnected that we thrive on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That anxiety feeling is and then you really can't get away from that when you're constantly connected. But they kind of transition a little bit of kind of along the same lines, but not exactly. With what do you think, like from an opportunity standpoint, with elk hunting? Elk hunting, just to give it as an example, but it can be applied to other species as well. But kind of like the future of it from a non-resident standpoint, as things are changing. With Colorado, removing the over-the-counter opportunities and just across the board things being more difficult. What do you see? Do you see any positives in some of that, or what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to this. It's one I think about a lot, because elk hunting for sure within like the macro hunting world, let's call it, people will argue if there's less hunting or more hunting or less hunters or more hunters or whatever. Within the elk hunting world, particularly certain aspects of it, like the archery wilderness deal in particular, it's exploded in terms of interest. And so, but even broader on the elk hunting front, and even if you inflation adjust it or whatever, like the market will tell you that there's way more interest because the hunts are way more expensive than they used to be. You know what I mean? So there's just more demand, and then that obviously trickles down into the draws and everything else. So I don't know where that all pans out for people. I think my suggestion on strategy going forward, if you want to do as much elk hunting as possible, and maybe one of your goals is to, that's like a skill set you're really interested in building up, I think you have to get in the mindset of being flexible. You know what I mean? And we may be entering an era at some point here where we can't hunt the same area over and over again. So we might have to expand a little bit beyond that. Like, hey, instead of always hunting, this particular unit in Colorado, I may need to start understanding how to hunt like the whole region of units. I think, those sort of things will help guys. I think being, flexible on even like your logistics, like, hey, I can backpack hunt, or I can, or I can road-based hunt, or I got pack goats, or I got llamas, or I got horses, or whatever. Like, having some flexibility in that regard opens more opportunity for hunting too. So I think that's generally a good thing. But I don't know. I could tell you what my hope is. Mm-hmm. I've been pretty, I'd say, vocal about this. Is I don't want to say that elk hunting is overrated, because elk hunting is not overrated in the sense that it's awesome. Like, guiding in September is probably still my favorite hunt, right? Guiding elk hunters in September is probably still my favorite hunt to guide, and probably by a pretty large metric. But, I also think that it's getting to the point now that there's a lot of other hunts that are comparable, and, you can put value in whatever box you want, like easy to draw, access, or, what the private market says a hunt costs in terms of guided stuff or private access or whatever, right? But I think there's some other hunts that are close to as much fun and are a whole lot more accessible too. So my hope is that maybe that the word gets out on that, and there's less constant pressure on the elk front. I think that if that doesn't happen, this is probably the more likely scenario, that from what I've seen, Fish and Game departments, they're always like 5 to 10 years behind, right? But once the momentum starts, they will shift. And what you're going to see is like a lot of these problems that people are vocal about, like, too many archers in this unit or that unit in Colorado or Idaho or whatever, right? And those are good examples because they're literally going through that right now. They've finally started to put this on their radar. What'll happen is it's like a pendulum swing over the next 5 years, that like those areas might look completely different, because they will deal with those problems. It just takes them like a really long time to do it. You know what I mean? And so to some extent, it'll be self-correcting, because if guys can't go elk hunting every year, they might start doing some of these other hunts. You know what I mean? So I don't, that's as good as answer as I can give on that, man.
Yeah, no, I've thought about that a lot too, of like, what does that look like? And even like with Colorado going to the draw, I mean, you have way more experience there than I do, but from what I've saw, I was like, they kind of needed to do that, because sure. it just the experience side of it was not great anymore. And I'm thinking, like, as things are harder with it, that as far as like not just being able to buy a tag on the way out, or just like playing it kind of on a whim, that it's gonna reduce the number of people that are doing it. It might take some time to kind of go through that, but then, as you said, maybe shift some things, and maybe things come back. They're not going to probably come back to the way they were, but as far as balance itself out, as things always go in ups and downs and flows. And I always look at that, like with hunting areas, there's areas that I've whitetail hunted that'll be real good, and then people know they're real good, and then they get so much pressure, but then everyone gets frustrated at once and everyone leaves, and it's a honey hole again. So it's like, I look at that a little bit from that standpoint. But what are those, what were you leading to as far as like some other hunts that you think that people should look at that are pretty cool opportunities that are more accessible?
I mean, it could be a lot of different things. I mean, the reality is, like, the cat's out of the bag on spring bear hunts. Like, that's all of a sudden very, very popular. And I would say even fall bear hunts. Like, dude, it was, so one thing that, this is just totally hypothetical. I have no reason to believe this would happen or anything else, but it's just as an example. If a lot of the states started moving their fall bear hunt or fall bear seasons where like there was 2 weeks like in like late August or something, so it didn't overlap with elk hunting, that would be a phenomenal opportunity for people. It's still a good opportunity. Like fall bear hunting in some of these states is a great opportunity to learn a new species, have fun. The problem is it's overlaps with a lot of everybody's focus on elk hunting. You know what I mean? But that's a great opportunity. Like I used to love, like I think I had to have been one of the first outfitters in Colorado, like really to go down that path. And when we started doing those hunts, they were so much fun because once you learned how to do it, it was like an abundant resource at the time. Things have changed a little bit, but you know, you could really figure them out and you could have some awesome, like 3-4 day hunts that we were like 80-90% successful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we figured out areas and you figure out, it's really, you know, it's just a cool thing to figure out. So that's one example. I would love to see there not to be no overlap because it could be a great opportunity for people. That's an example. I think that, you know, even trying to think of like other ones that are similar. That's one big one that pops out for me is like a Western hunter. I actually think that, and it kind of extends the original discussion we had. I think there's a lot of opportunities that are just a little stretch in terms of logistics that people probably, you know, overlook, right? Like going to Alaska on hunts that, you know, the DIY hunts that you're able to do there, those hunts, you know, I think those are probably underrated. I think New Zealand's underrated. I think there's, you know, we're talking about a different level of things, but you know, you can broaden your horizon to those because what happens is as these hunts get more expensive or harder to draw or whatever, all of a sudden those become like more practical relative. You know what I mean? Like they may have seemed so far fetched, but now it's like, well, I don't know. Like if I can't really get a quality elk hunt other than every 5 years, like all of a sudden New Zealand doesn't sound all that bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think there's components of that. I mean, the reality too, dude, I know this is kind of a less of an overlapping season, but I think for certain personalities right now in the hunting world, I think bird hunting's underrated, dude. Like when I was a kid, man, I loved duck hunting. And it's so weird to me to see that so many new hunters, and I think we're probably talking just to a segment of your audience, you know, but like the guys that are just coming into hunting, they're all coming in directly into elk hunting. Like, dude, if you want to just kill some stuff and cook it and have fun with buddies, duck hunting is awesome. You know what I mean? Like, so I think there's things like that all fall into that category. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. And I'd said this before too, of like, I got into elk hunting and I had read Cam's book back in 2014 or something about, and I thought I had to, you know, start out with a backpack hunt as steep and deep and as, you know, as you could. And I was like, I would not recommend that for the first, you know, luckily I had experience backpacking and stuff before, but even then I was not ready for doing that. And it's like, all right, there's other opportunities to slowly get your way into different things, different deer hunts, and you know, whitetails are something that are underrated in the West in a lot of places that not specifically in Colorado, but that where, you know, residents don't really seem to care a whole lot about them, but those of us from the East love whitetail hunting, and you can do some really cool adventure style whitetail hunts. I'm actually looking at trying to plan on doing one in the West of like similar to how I hunt them in the Appalachian Mountains, but being able to do that out West. And I think that would be super cool to do so. The bear hunting, the spring bear hunting, it was funny when I went in 2022. You can see it there up on the wall. And
nice. That's a cool mount too.
Oh, I love that mount. It was pretty sweet. And that was the first time I tried bear hunting, and I knew nothing about it, but like just going into it was so much fun to go. And it was like, I'm doing this in the spring when normally I'm not getting to be in the mountains. And it was getting popular at that time. That was 2022, but it still wasn't crazy, at that point. I don't have any experience recently to say otherwise, but it was fun to get to go do that and learn another species of like, I don't know. I just heard that, they come out and they feed in these openings and that sort of deal, but
start to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was fun to look at some of those different opportunities that are available, to go chase. But so going back, do you want to explain a little bit about what's changing in Colorado as far as like, we had mentioned about the over-the-counter ones going to a draw. What do you think? Is there any information out there about like what that are probably going to look like? You think those units are going to be like 0-point draws, or do you have any information on that?
Yeah. So I don't have any like inside scoop on it, man. And I'll tell you, I've tried to get like the inside scoop. And the reality is I don't think that there really is one. I think they're still trying to figure out like what this is actually going to look like. But I can theorize based on some things I've seen in the past. Like I saw, over my lifetime, I saw rifle units go from over the counter, basically to draw, right? They changed the structure around, but all of a sudden you had areas where those dates used to be over the counter. Now they were draw first, rifle, whatever. So when those changes occurred, you generally didn't see a big drop in the actual tag, like allocation or the tag sold. So I think that that's probably what you're going to see in Colorado, at least for the short term. And again, this is just speculation, man. Like, I don't know the case, but what's interesting is I've pressed some people who I would think would know on the question of like, okay, all these tags are going non-resident draw archery. Are you going to combine that with reducing, what you think the tags have been in the past by like 5% or 10%, right? So are you going to reduce what you think have been, and I say what you think has been in there in terms of pressure, because the reality is, dude, Colorado doesn't actually know how many people have been hunting each unit.
Yeah.
So that's a real big thing that I think they've probably purposely not really discussed, because it's probably like kind of a hole in their data. Which unfortunately, if they would have had mandatory harvest reporting, like a lot of these states, they would know that exactly. They would know how many days you spent in 25, how many days you spent in 26. Like they'd know that. But now, dude, so many of these units have been just part of that over-the-counter chunk. I mean, some of even the rifle draw tags, there'll be like 10 units, or not 10, but like 6, heavy population units in one rifle draw tag. They don't know the actual amount of hunters that have been in each one. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I would suspect, combining that, all of those data points, I don't think that they're going to reduce tags a bunch, right? I think there could be spots where they inadvertently do, and they didn't realize it. You know what I mean? Like they didn't realize that, like, holy crap, there was that, like, we're going to put a bunch of tags and say 25. And because there's been a lot of archers hunting that over the counter or whatever. And then the draw goes through and they're like, oh man, there was way more people hunting it than we thought. And then some of those people don't draw. But my best guess is that they probably have a rough idea, like regionally, how many people have been hunting. I think that they're going to, here in the beginning, probably put quotas pretty high until they get an idea of how many hunters are actually hunting.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is unfortunate, or, I don't know what to say about it, but I do think that they're going to see a drop-off in a lot of the over-counter stuff, just because there's a certain segment of hunters that they just won't go if it's not over the counter. Like if they have to put in for the draw or they have to deal with anything, they just won't go. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's to me, it's like an enigma to me, like how that could be your barrier. But there are a certain amount of hunters that are just like, oh, I guess I'm not hunting anymore or what, it sounds wild to even say, but there are a segment of guys like that. So there will be a reduction in tags, because of that, or, guys in certain areas. But I don't know. I think though, dude, after a couple years of that scenario where there's probably an abundance of tags, I think the outcry about too many hunters and the experience is still going to be there. And then you're going to start to see like quotas tightened up a little bit. That'd be my guess. And that's probably when you're going to see, a shift in the dynamic. So I don't know, but there's like a million other variables, dude. Like the wolf deal, or are the wolves going to just crap out and not do very well? Or are they going to start killing a bunch of elk? I don't know the answer to all that.
Yeah, no, that's a lot that you have to kind of speculate on, and it's not. I guess we'll find out here. And then in 28, there's going to be a change that was announced here recently as far as the tag allocations with people that are applying with the preference points.
Right. So, yeah, and the gist of that is that it used to be preference point only for mule deer, elk, antelope in Colorado. So if you had the highest preference points in a draw, then you were going to draw. And there was always pretty good certainty about that because we had historical data on it or whatever. But now they're going to take 50% of the tags and put them into a hybrid pool, and then 50% will stay to the preference point holders. Dude, and there's uncertainty in that too, because, the question is like, how is that going to shift everything around? Are a lot of the super high point guys, are they going to, they for sure got hosed 100%. Statistically, this is going to, that it took kind of like quote equity away from them. And so what are they going to do? Are they just going to blow their points and just hunt? Are they just going to keep holding out and, and just, I don't know, you know what I mean? But there's like this trickle down of a ton of variables that makes it very hard to speculate what the draw is going to look like in 7 or 8 years. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that it definitely is weird because and I mean I understand the idea of something needing to change. It's obviously going to make people that have been applying and have a lot of points, that really screws them over per se. But the thing is, like, for example, I think I have like 8 elk points in Colorado, and I was chasing a unit that at the time took 4 points to draw, and I can't catch it because it's, the point creep is going. So it's just like, okay, and now I'm like, all right, I'm probably not going to draw that tag. But you have this dynamic of like, oh, I might be able to, now, I mean, I'm going to have to either hope that I can get something second choice or burn the points if I want to hunt elk in Colorado. Right. I mean, that's all there is to it. And I don't think I'll build points again in Colorado. Like, it was funny, like probably 4 years ago, I felt like I had my strategy dialed of like how I could hunt between different states, and Wyoming and Montana and Idaho and Colorado were kind of like my main ones that I'd focus on. It was like, all right, every few years I'm going to have a pretty good hunt, and then there's other hunts that I can fill in between. And now there's so much uncertainty. I was just on the phone with a buddy last night until 11 o'clock at night as we were reviewing things, looking at applying in Wyoming. And at the time of recording this, Wyoming's draws tomorrow. And then just, I'm like, man, I could end up with a bunch of tags or I could end up with 0. I'm not really sure. Yeah. So it's harder. It's going to be harder to plan. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. For non-resident, Colorado's not going to just be like a backstop state too. So that plays into that whole, if you got like a Western, overall strategy, there's going to be that issue. And then you also have all these substitution effects, like, the Idaho that, they don't call it a draw, but the whole Q thing and on those tags, like there's obviously way more demand this year. And a lot of that is like Colorado, like guys that have been dependent on Colorado or like, maybe I need to get into this. Right. So there's more demand there. So you got all this dynamic. I don't know the answer. And anybody who's listened to me on podcasts, they're probably like, oh, I listened to this other podcast with Cliff and he had certainty it was going to work out this way. So I've thought about it a lot, and I started to realize, like, dude, who knows? I do think though and it's not to dwell on like a negative subject, but I think just as a mind puzzle, I think the biggest factor in the next decade, let's say, or the next 10 to 15 years, which is like for me and you is like prime hunting part of our life, right? I think the biggest component, or at least for me, I think I got probably a decade on you, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a big chunk of our hunting life. I think the biggest question is going to be the supply side on elk and what the wolf deal is going to look like in Colorado. I mean, it could not change anything. They could struggle. They could, there's lots of reasons why. I have a good friend who's a biologist that he really thinks they're just not going to thrive there, regardless of how things go. But then it could, there could be 100,000 less elk in Colorado 10 years from now. You know what I mean? And so that's going to be, to me, like the biggest, nominal factor is what that all this shit we're talking about is almost like cumulatively would be irrelevant compared to that factor.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think it comes down to kind of what you mentioned earlier about the diversifying of like what your options are to
Sure.
have opportunities, and it's just like that's the matter of the fact, and I think we can dwell on a lot of it as far as being negative because it's not the same and change is hard with it. But I think if you keep an open mind and you're willing to adapt a little bit, you can still have awesome opportunities and be able to live and like, and have, maybe you find something you like better than elk hunting and you can do it more. And that's, we have that opportunity, that's what I'm thankful for. But the wolf thing, man, that's a whole nother thing that is a scary, like what you said, as far as like that could change more than any of these other factors that we've talked about as far as tag allocations and everything else. Like that's a dynamic that's, could be ever changing.
Yeah. And who knows how that goes, but I think you hit it on the head, dude. Like the whole adaptability and not getting stuck on things. What I tell guys, just because it's been such a big part of my life, dude, and really since I was a little kid, man. So, I've been around the hunting world. I don't think people who have been around it they haven't been around it for decades, they don't realize like how much these things do fluctuate. Like elk, like in the West, dude, elk has always been king, right? Like everybody wants to come out and shoot at elk. It's a big animal. It's kind of like the Western thing, right? It's for sure been a thing, but we've been on an elk rip for like 7 or 8 years. That's just like everybody, that's the thing, right? But over the years, dude, like species, the interest in different species and different hunts, like it ebbs and flows, and it's a marketing thing. Like I can tell you like and I don't mean like an overt purpose driven marketing thing by like some hunting industry. I just mean that it gets momentum, and then all the gear is about the aspirations of going elk hunting. All the podcasts. I mean, dude, a lot of dude, I love it. I love elk hunting. I love talking about elk hunting. But there's a million other things that I also love talking about. Like, dude, if half my YouTube channel could be about spearfishing, I would make it that, but nobody will watch it because the market of spearfishermen is tiny relative to elk hunters. So there's this huge distortive effect, right? Like I tend to talk about it because that's what people want me to talk about, which is fine. But like you get a lot of momentum on these things. And I think that could be a big factor too. That can change, dude. Like there's so many things I've seen, I think people underestimate what just a few people's interest can turn into. I mean, who knows, dude? Maybe like if we get a couple famous guys that love going to Texas and stabbing pigs with dogs, all of a sudden that could be a thing. You know what I mean? Like this world changes pretty dramatically,
Yeah, that is a good point. and there's like, I mean, that's an example would be like the spring bear thing. Like that was something that gained some popularity and there was more emphasis put on it, showed in videos, those types of things, and it gained a little bit of traction on that side. And like there's a lot of ways that could be could be
Sure.
spun around and do it. And it is hard, like from when you're talking about the content side of things, say for your YouTube channel. It's funny. Mine is, I've always wanted to talk about like the Western stuff mostly, but I've learned that
Sure.
what I've grew up doing, and whitetails has a much bigger population
big market,
than the elk side of it. So it's like whitetail stuff will do, better than elk per se, and elk will do better than mule deer, and mule deer will do better.
Sure.
It's like it's funny how that segment works, and I think there's the mixture of the aspiration side of it, and then there's also the relatability of it, of what someone is able to be able to do or go and hunt.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting, dude, because anybody who produces content, like, and they're pretty serious about it, they actually know a lot about the hunting market that the average guy doesn't know. Like, I mean, exactly what species are king. And all the gear guys know the same thing, and they're all watching it because it's life, right? Like, it's relevant to how much people are going to consume your content. So it's relevant, but it's amazing. Like, I end up in the same conversation with anybody who produces content. Like, everybody knows whitetail, then elk, and then you get going down, and it's huge, dude. Like, I get guys that are like, Cliff, why don't you do, videos on mountain goats, right? I love hunting mountain goats. I probably guided more mountain goat hunts than, there's probably like 5 of us that have guided as many mountain goat hunts as I have. No point in me making a video on it because 18 people are going to watch it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
that's so true.
Yeah. So it just is what it is, but I guess the point is that it can change, and also there's opportunities, man. Like, I see little microcosms of it, Beau. Like, dude, back in the day, Aoudad, like free range Aoudad, were like, you could go hunt them for $500, dude. And the guys that were doing it were like basically laughing at everybody else. And then, word got out, and now it's $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to hunt the good stuff. You know what I mean? But
I was actually going to bring up Aoudad as a species that I all of a sudden see a lot more people, and that was something I didn't know that was an opportunity. And I seen it, I was like, that'd be cool. That looks like fun. But I was a little bit late to the game on it. But it is funny to see that.
Yeah,
I guess the trick is trying to figure out what's going to become popular next and getting ahead of the curve, right? Finding those those nitty gritty opportunities, or those fun things to be able to do. And I will say this, that I think there are so many opportunities on the East Coast and the Appalachian Mountain Range to do like adventure style hunts that is just like, say someone like you that lives out west may not know. I mean, there's awesome bear hunt opportunities, and you can get in some remote, cool wilderness backpack style. You can do that for whitetails. You can do it for bear, turkey, and there's a lot of opportunities. That's kind of an untapped market, or something that people can also go do and still have that experience. And I've shifted, like, talking about some of this to show people that, even though they can't pull an elk tag or go do something, you can still find that adventure that you're looking for, find some cool hunts that are closer to home, but still have that, what you're looking for, and hitting those different components of it. And, I'm always looking to try to find those opportunities and go hunt them. And I think, like, also taking and adding what weapons that I'll use has opened up more opportunities, like muzzleloader opportunities. There's so many more of those that I didn't know, because I never used a muzzleloader before. And then I started using a muzzleloader, and I was like, holy cow, I can deer hunt these different places, and there's not many people doing it because I'm using a muzzleloader. Where archery is, has been blown up, and a lot of the rut hunts are harder to with people. And then even like whitetails, like almost like, I don't know, maybe it's not backwards with elk and stuff, but I see, like, at least a lot of buddies I have that if they're going on elk hunts, they'll go, I mean, there's some that'll go archery, but a lot of them will go guided rifle hunting. Like, that's kind of like the barrier to entry to get into it. On the whitetail side, everyone wants to hunt the rut with a bow and go out, where in the past it used to be everyone gun hunted. Well, now everyone switched because bows are cool. And so now there's like a lot more opportunity in the gun seasons to go to places and do things. And it's just, I don't know. It's funny how that all works.
Well, and we for sure is just a hunting world. We've also become where we like to pigeonhole everybody like, oh, he's a bow hunter, he's a rifle hunter. You know, I get it all the time. People crack me up. Like I'll have comments that are like, hey, like I know that you're a rifle guy, but why don't you do some video? Like, would you do a video on, archery, this archery thing or whatever? And I'm like, dude, I ain't a rifle guy. Like I guide more archery hunts than any other elk hunt because the month's so long. It's a long month. Like this is a giant part of my business. But it's like I don't view it that way. You know what I mean, Beau? Like I just view it as like you're a hunter. And I get it. Like some people are gonna have preference for certain weapons, and a lot of that has to do with when they like to hunt and all of that. The idea of it dictating what hunts you do is to me is like insane. You know what I mean?
I agree.
If there was some cool hunt where like I had to learn how to spear something, I'd totally just learn how to spear it. You know what I mean? Like, what? Why? Well,
yeah.
I think it's a weird deal, and I think it is a function, man. Like I feel like I feel like sometimes I bring an element of negativity, like going after some like boogeyman, but I do think some of this is a function of like the marketing in the hunting space, like bow hunting. Bow hunting is like puts you like above rifle hunting. It's like, yeah, well, depends on what we're talking about and who cares, because there's still tons of rifle hunts that are a freaking blast. You know what I mean?
Oh, man, I'm all about. I've really learned that like it's the perspective and the opportunity. Like I just want a sweet experience. Like I don't care what's in my hand, whatever I can do that's fun and that's a good time. Like I'm all for it. Like when I went to Alaska, they're moose hunting a couple years ago. It was like, man, everyone's like, you taking a bow? You bow hunting them? I'm like, I'm gonna take a rifle. I can, and like, I've never been able to do this before. Like, I want to increase my opportunity at success and be able to, shoot a little further and
sure.
And that's just like, I don't know, and that comes down to what you want. But I think, I agree with what you said there as far as just like. I think you can pigeonhole yourself a little bit, and I think marketing has a lot to do with that, and looking at it as this premier thing that if you're just a bow hunter per se.
Yeah, sure, but
no, well, Cliff, I do want to be respectful of your time here, but I just want to ask you one more thing, if you could, if you had any advice for anybody that is like, from your guiding perspective, from, getting people writing in with the podcast and the YouTube channel and everything, like what is something that you think people overlook or don't think of when they're trying something new in hunting, whether that be, Western hunting, you can go specific as elk hunting or whatever. Like, what do you see as like, a question that comes up a lot or something maybe people don't think about?
Like an overlooked aspect in the elk hunting side of things, let's say, because I get a lot of questions in that regard. I'll answer this in the maybe a little bit of a self-serving way, but I'll answer it in the context of like how like I get messages after the season a lot of time. They're like, dude, I would have never thought like this video would have helped me so much because you're such a nerd, Cliff, but like I watched it passively and it like changed my hunt because of that video or whatever. And I have a few of those that are even surprises to me. And like, I have one dude that all I do is talk about why people quit, like why people, like just reasons. I try to get into like some of the physiological reasons why I speculate people quit. Like it kind of alludes to what we talked about before, like making sure you show up rested and like these very basic concepts, like those concepts, how to take care of yourself on, these backcountry hunts and how important it is, like sleep, all of these things that nobody talks about. I think that's a huge one that people overlook. And I think they're almost embarrassed to like research it or discuss it because they assume that it's a level of manliness if you can just bear it out. Well, there's also just like literally technical things that you should consider. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, dude, it took me several years as a guide to realize that if I wasn't hungry, it was irrelevant. I still had to consume X amount of calories. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or as like a dysfunctional zombie, like stupid stuff like that. makes a gigantic difference in a lot of these hunts. So I think like, that topic has been sent to me a lot as a thing. Probably the other one that I get a lot on is that, I don't know, dude, because I haven't spent a lot of time hunting whitetail. Obviously, like the wind is a giant factor for everybody that hunts back east too. But I think there's elements about the wind in the West that people aren't quite as in tune with because of the topography, right? And the thing is like and this may not be any different than whitetail, but people realize it when they're up in the mountains and they're hunting elk, that it's an analogous thing, is how these animals that are pressured, they're consciously using the wind to their advantage all the time. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably another more on the tactics that people probably overlook a little bit.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I would definitely recommend that everyone that's listening go check out Cliff's YouTube channel, which is just Cliff Gray, and then your podcast that's Pursuit with Cliff, correct? Is that the name of it? Okay.
Yep.
And then your website, pursuitwithcliff.com, and then social media, all that kind of stuff. You can find you there. What is your handle on social media?
Yeah, it's Cliff. It's CLIFFGRY, because there's another Cliff Gray.
Oh,
yeah, which is funny because he messaged that the guy who has my name's not common, you know what I mean? Like, it's not a super common name. But the guy messaged me when I was on Rogan. He's like, "What's going on?" He's like, "I'm like, unlucky for you, dude. We share a name," because I think he was getting blasted with the emails or something,
like people trying to follow him or something. After
yeah. He's like, "What the hell just happened?" But anyway, it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But, no, dude, thank you for having me on.
No, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day and enjoy the nice weather in the Caribbean.
Yeah, it's all good, dude. I'll be back up in the cold soon.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with your buddies. Leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe. If you want to check out more content like this, there's plenty in the links below. We truly appreciate having you guys along with us.